SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
රින් වෙළඳපොලේ අඩුම මිලකට රුපියල් 180යි.
Tonight, friendly chats. The Premier meets with the Chinese envoy where currency swaps and bilateral cooperation take centre stage. Changing spots. Chinese fertilizer ship nears Sri Lankan shores after alleged name change in Singapore as port official says it won't make a difference. Up in smoke. Academics call on the government to take a serious look at tobacco product price revisions.
So, of course, government is free to choose whichever policy model they would like. Verite itself has recommended or sort of gone with analysis on the moderate policy, right?
Watch your words. Catholic clergymen arrive at the Criminal Investigation Department on military intel chief's complaint. All this and much more coming up on this Thursday, the 28th of October, 2021.
Nelly මතකෙන් ගිලිහුණු black shiny කෙස් කලඹක රහස sunset black shine සමගින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando in your top stories for tonight. Aggamahapandita Dr. Most Venerable Velamitiave Siri Kusala Dhamma Thera passed away last evening at the age of 84. Venerable Thera served as the Chancellor of the University of Kelaniya before his demise. Following the demise of the Thera, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa ordered to perform the final rites under full state honours.
Agamaha Pandita Dr. Most Venerable Valamitiyave Dharmakirti Sri Kusala Dhammathera was well known within the public domain for his great service rendered to uplift the country's Buddha Sasana, as well as for his contribution for the university network. The Venerable Kusala Dhammathera passed away last night while receiving treatment at the private hospital in Colombo. The Thera was aged 84 at the time of his demise. The Venerable Kusala Dhammathera was the chief judicial prelate in charge of the Colombo and Chilau for the Malwata chapter. The Thera also served as the Chancellor of the University of Kelaniya as well. The remains of the Venerable Kusala Dhammathera are currently at a private funeral parlour in Colombo for the public to pay their respects. As per the instructions of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to the Secretaries of the Ministry of Housing and Buddha Sasana, the final rites of the Thera will be held under complete state honours.
Big 3.
164 vehicles were handed over to a host of state-run institutions and ministries such as the Ministry of Health, Department of Wildlife and others by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today. Meanwhile, Chinese Ambassador to Sri Lanka, Kee Zhen-hong, after calling on Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa yesterday, stressed on how investor perspective on Sri Lanka would enhance through the 10 billion Chinese yuan bilateral currency swap.
Several state ministries and institutions received a total of 164 vehicles for use in field work. The presentation was made by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today to the respective ministers in charge of the selected ministries. Included in the new fleet were 50 ambulances, 52 water buses and 62 double cabs. The 50 ambulances were handed over to the Ministry of Health to improve the Suez area ambulance service. The water buses and double cabs were handed over to the Department of Wildlife Conservation, the Irrigation Department, local government institutions and district secretariats. Meanwhile, the head of state also officially handed over 150 motorcycles to the Sri Lanka police, which were received through a Japan International Cooperation System donation. In the meantime, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa met with the Ambassador of the People's Republic of China, Kee Zhen-hong, yesterday, where a number of topics of bilateral interest were discussed. The meeting comes as controversy grows over Chinese organic fertilizer, a shipment of which was rejected by the Sri Lankan authorities based on results of the tests conducted by the National Plant Quarantine Service. This is due to the policy decision taken by the Sri Lankan government not to accept a bulk consignment of organic fertilizer sent by China after harmful pathogens were detected in it. According to reports, during the meeting, Premier Rajapaksa expressed his gratitude to the Chinese government for its continued support for Sri Lanka in its battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. The Chinese envoy then congratulated the Premier for the Sri Lankan government's successful vaccination drive and assured continued support for Sri Lanka in its endeavours. The ambassador also emphasized the importance of the impending 10 billion yuan bilateral currency swap agreement between the People's Bank of China and the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, which he says would help strengthen investor sentiment and confidence in the Sri Lankan economy.
Indian media reports are claiming that the Chinese fertilizer carrier vessel MV Hippo Spirit has changed its name in order to enter the Colombo port. Obtaining clarification on the possibility of such a name change, maritime expert Dr. Danmalika Gunasekara says that a vessel can change its name anytime and it's the IMO number that does not change. However, Harbour Master of the port, Captain Nirmal De Silva, says that a change of name will not help a vessel enter since its cargo has already been rejected.
On the 17th of September, Minister of Agriculture Mahindananda Alutgamage revealed in Parliament that harmful bacteria was found in samples of organic fertilizer manufactured in China. The tests were conducted by the National Plant Quarantine Service of Sri Lanka on samples provided by Qingdao Seavin Biotech, from which the government of Sri Lanka ordered 96,000 metric tons of organic fertilizer. Of that amount, 22,000 tons of the fertilizer left China on the 22nd of September and was expected to arrive on the 25th of October. The ship was also scheduled to dock at Singapore before arriving in Colombo. In this backdrop, the NPQS revealed once again on the 20th of September that further tests showed the same results, that the fertilizer contained both Erevenia and Bacillus bacteria. Following this, the Agriculture Minister halted importation of the Chinese fertilizer in question on the 29th of September. Despite the ban, the fertilizer ship continued its journey to Singapore, hoping to sort things out and arrive in Colombo. However, on the 15th of October, the Ceylon Fertilizer Company wrote to the Chinese company through its local representative, citing the bacteria issue and informing the company that the fertilizer did not meet with the conditions of the agreement. By that time, the fertilizer ship had commenced its journey from Singapore to Sri Lanka. Director General of Agriculture Department Dr. Ajanta De Silva said that as of yesterday, the ship remains 22 kilometers off Sri Lanka's coast. Despite the ship continuing its journey to Sri Lanka, the Agriculture Minister reiterated the government's stance that the vessel will not be allowed to dock at the Colombo port. The Harbour Master of Colombo Port, Captain Nirmal De Silva, told First at 9 that the rejection of cargo by the National Plant Quarantine Service is sufficient grounds for the vessel to be banned from entry. In the meantime, Indian media is reporting that the vessel had changed its name from Hippo Spirit to Seiyo Explorer in Singapore and would attempt to enter Sri Lanka. The media report also showed that Hippo Spirit and the Seiyo Explorer appear to have the same number, 9135523. On this, the Colombo Port's Harbour Master says that changing its name alone won't be enough to gain entry. This was also conveyed by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa to the Chinese ambassador in Sri Lanka of the government's intention to not accept the shipment during a meeting yesterday. We also sought clarification from maritime law expert Dr. Danmalika Gunasekara on what the vessel's motives could be.
Under international context, a ship can always change its name either with the change of ownership or within the particular ownership that the ship is running with. The ship's name can be changed. But what is unique is that the IMO number or the International Maritime Organization number given to the ship does not change at any cost. It remains from the time the ship is built up to the time the ship is scrapped. But here in this particular matter, there is no ship arrest or anything that has been done. So the ship has reportedly entered Sri Lankan waters, which is legal in that context. And given the scenario, it is now the ship has to wait for the instructions of the seller, whether it has to dock in Port of Colombo or whether it has to get back to wherever the seller is instructing the ship to do. Because in a charter party, in like scenario carrying bulk cargo, it is the seller who enters into the contract of carriage, and then the instructions are given by the seller himself. The ship has come legally to the waters of Sri Lanka in that case. So name change is not that significant or material to the present matter.
The Sri Lanka Medical Association is urging the government to not completely ease the health and safety guidelines issued by the Health Ministry as the resurgence of another wave in the country is imminent. The SLMA made these remarks after noting the emergence of new waves in countries such as the UK, Israel and Singapore. However, head of the College of Sri Lanka Pediatricians, Professor Shaman Rajendra believes that Sri Lanka is in a good position to control the pandemic as the country is an island and due to the good control measures in place.
Sri Lanka has been able to bring its daily COVID cases below 1,000 after 6 months through the implementation of an island-wide curfew. However, once a curfew was lifted on the 1st of October, public behavior has not been up to expectation in terms of health and safety regulations. Despite the interprovincial travel restrictions, many people were seen travelling across provincial borders to visit various tourist destinations. Following this, the Ministry of Health reiterated that such behaviour will only compromise the country's hard-earned gains. As such, Sri Lanka's Medical Association issued a letter directed to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, highlighting the importance of taking precise measures at this point to prevent the resurgence of another wave. However, the association believes that the occurrence of another COVID wave in the country is imminent, as countries such as the United Kingdom, Singapore and Israel are experiencing similar situations. With this being the case, they urge the government to take measures to strictly enforce the quarantine guidelines and to delay the easing of restrictions set in place for a little longer. This was recommended as they say that super spreader events could easily be prompted through large gatherings in small spaces. The SLMA also suggested that a booster dose using the Pfizer vaccine be rolled out to priority groups quickly, as high-risk groups such as the elderly could be prone to infection with easing of restrictions and children going to school. Adding to these sentiments, President of the Sri Lanka College of Pediatricians, Professor Shaman Rajendra says that the country is in a good position to control the virus spread.
දිවයිනක් හැටියට අපිට ඊට වැඩිය හොඳ අවස්ථාවක් තියෙනවා මේක පාලනය කරලා තියාගන්න. මොකද අපි රට ඕපන් කරාට අපි ඉතාමත්ම විශාල ප්‍රමාණයෙන් මිනිසුන් රට තුලට එන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ ණයවත් අපි පරීක්ෂණයක භාජනය කරලා නිවැරදි ක්‍රමවේදයක් අනුව ගන්නෙ. ඒකට අපිට මේක පාලනය කරගෙන යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒකට වැදගත් වෙන්නේ අනිත් සාධකත් දැන් අපි ජනතාවගෙන් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ සමාජ දුරස්ථභාවය, මුවාවරණ නිවැරදිව පැලැඳීම, අනවශ්‍ය තැන්වල ඒකරාශී නොවීම. එතකොට ඒ විදිහට ඉස්සරහට ගියොත් මේ වට සවන් දීලා මම හිතනවා අපි ලෝකයේ අනිත් පැතිවල මොනවා වුණත් අපිට සාධාරණ ලෙස රෝගය පාලනය කරගෙන ජීවත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි. දැන් එන්නත ලබා දුන්නා කියන එක අපිට රස්තියාදු ගහන්න දීපු ලයිසන් එකක් නෙවෙයි. ඒ බුද්ධිමත්ව හැසිරෙන්න දීපු ලයිසන් එකක්. එතකොට අපිට යම්තාක් සාධාරණ හේතුන් සඳහා සාධාරණ ලෙස ඒකරාශී වීම කරන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් එතනින් එහාට යන්න එපා. කාලයත් සමග එම ප්‍රතිදේහ ප්‍රමාණය පවා අඩු වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඉතින් ඒක නිසා සිංහල අවුරුදු වෙනකන්වත් අපි ඊටමත් පරිස්සමෙන් සෞඛ්‍ය නිර්දේශ වලට අනුකූලව ජීවත් වෙන්න ඕන ජනතාව අපි.
In the meantime, State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channajai Sumana says that the government is considering administering vaccines to children aged between 12 and 15 years of age. He reassured that there are adequate stocks of Pfizer-BioNTech shots in the country to roll out vaccinations for this group. The State Minister also said that there are plans also afoot to roll out the booster dose of the Pfizer vaccine to people above 20 years of age in the country.
මිලියන 18.8 නිවස ලක්ෂ 5ක් ගෙවා දැන්ම වෙන් කරවා ගන්න මල්බෙරි රෙසිඩන්ස්.
Welcome back in more news. Member of the National Catholic Committee formed to serve justice to Easter Sunday attack victims, Reverend Father Cyril Gamini Fernando was summoned by the Criminal Investigation Department today to record a statement over claims that the country's intelligence arms has provided financial and other assistance to Zahran Hashim and co. Father Gamini, however, did not appear before the CID and requested for a week to prepare his statement, for which permission was granted. Director of the State Intelligence Service Major General Suresh Saleh filed a complaint with the Criminal Investigation Department recently over comments made by Reverend Father Cyril Gamini, alleging that the intelligence arms of the country has provided financial and other assistance to Zahran Hashim and his group of terrorists. The comments were made during an online forum held to brief the Sri Lankan community living overseas pertaining to the Easter spate of terror. Proceeding on the complaint, the CID summoned Reverend Father Gamini today to record a statement on his recent utterances made online. However, Father Cyril Gamini did not appear before the CID today and instead requested for a week's time to prepare his statement. On behalf of Father Gamini, 3 priests conveyed his request to the CID, for which permission was granted. Meanwhile, responding to media on the summoning of Reverend Father Cyril Gamini, Minister of Public Security Rear Admiral Dr. Sarath Veerasekara said that comments concerning national security should be interrogated.
මත ප්‍රකාශකාර පස්සේ ඒවා ජාතික ආරක්ෂාවට අදාළ වෙනවා ඕන් පත්‍රවලට පමණක් නෙමෙයි CID එකට ඇවිල්ලා ඒ විස්තර කිය යුතුයි.
Speaking on gender representation during a thematic session of Making Global Goals Local Business, speakers called for a level playing field for women in decision-making and work environments. Speaking at the virtual conference yesterday, Deputy Regional Director of UN Women in Asia and the Pacific, Sarah Nibbs, highlighted that data suggests that women's active participation is crucial for economic prosperity. The thematic session of Making Global Goals Local Business on gender, titled Breaking Gender Barriers in the Boardroom, was conducted virtually yesterday.
A really key part of SDG 5 is ensuring that women reach the highest levels of leadership across the board, but that includes, of course, the private sector. We have a lot of evidence to show us that women's active participation and decision-making in the economy is really crucial to long-term economic prosperity. In 2019, for example, the World Bank's International Finance Corporation analysed more than 1,000 companies across ASEAN countries, and it showed that companies with more than 30% women in the board actually performed much better financially than those that had less than 30% women in the board. In fact, there are actually over 90 studies and reports from different countries, different organisations and contexts, which consistently show there's a correlation between having more women in the board in decision-making positions and better financial performance of companies.
There is nothing special we need to do. We don't need to be chasing numbers, percentage and KPI. We encourage very open communication across the organization to an extent where this becomes an innate behavior all the employees in the company. And obviously, it's a continuous process. We opened our operations in Sri Lanka last year. The core operations team that we have in HCL Sri Lanka currently has close to around 60% employees who are females. While I think we are very proud of the percentage and the gender diversity that we have achieved, what I think we are really proud of is that we have done nothing special. We just picked the right candidates from the market. This is an organic state where we are. I do think we have a long way to go in achieving gender neutrality in many organizations, many industries, including ours. We have focused career development programs for budding leaders, career development programs for senior leaders, women leaders to take on much higher leadership roles. The focus of setting up policies should be to create a level playing field in the company.
For us, actually, we don't look at is this a woman or a man. If the person is capable, I think we have come to that position now. We are grooming both men and women to be general managers of our properties. It is a task for some of them. Culturally, we manage 2 hotels in Jaffna, for example. There are wonderful ladies working there. Unfortunately, the moment they get married, the men ask them to just stay at home. So we lose them. Sri Lanka loses them. Hospitality industry loses them. And I think it's a shame. If that changes, I think we will have more very capable young women taking on leadership roles. In order to get the whole culture change, I think the men will also have to change as well. Some of the thinking of men especially, more females are getting onto boards, taking on more leadership roles. I think there is a lot more to be done, especially in Sri Lanka. Culturally, we have to allow females to take on more responsibility.
The data having shown that the government revenue from tobacco sales are trailing what the manufacturer earns in the past 10 years, Verity Research Executive Director Nishan Dimel says that the government will have to pursue a moderate tax revision in the upcoming budget. During a presentation of the proposals for any possible revision, Dimel showed that CTC revenue per cigarette for its cheapest brand grew 10.7 times opposed to 7.3 times for government revenue, which is not quite the way it should be going.
Sri Lanka's new budget is due to be presented next month, with the government having to focus on improving its revenue generation as it tries to maintain some semblance of economic stability. Excise taxes from alcohol and tobacco have long been a mainstay of government revenue, contributing billions every year towards national expenditure. This time around, with cigarette prices having basically stayed the same in the past 2 years or more, consumers are expecting the hammer to fall next month in the budget. A significant point to note is that despite inflation levels having increased significantly since the last price hike, cigarettes have basically stayed the same. Currently, government taxes of the price of a single stick amount to around 75% of the total price, while the remainder goes to the manufacturer. According to Verite Research Executive Director Nishan Dimel, there is a major disparity that needs to be fixed. He says that the net of tax price collected by the Ceylon Tobacco Company over the past decade has grown faster than the government tax revenue from tobacco products.
What CTC collected grew 10.7 times for the cheapest brand, in contrast to what the government collected, which grew only 7.3 times in a 10-year period that we looked at. Likewise, for the most sold brand, what CTC collected grew 8.7 times, while what the government collected grew only 5.3 times. So this means that CTC's revenue per cigarette has been growing at a higher rate or much faster than the revenue per cigarette to the government, once again indicating suboptimal taxation. So prices are going up, but the proportion of the price that is collected by the tobacco company has been growing much faster than the proportion of the price that is collected by the government. What you see is that tobacco company has increased price more aggressively than government increased taxes. So if you look at 2005 onwards, when taxing price was 85%, it's not because government is reducing the taxes, government is increasing taxes. However, tobacco company is increasing the price faster than the government is increasing the tax, which is why the taxing price comes down.
With that, Verite Research held a webinar today where the findings of a study on tobacco tax revisions that the government should consider in the next year's budget, including a list of suggestions for its approach. Verite gives the government three options to approach the subject, namely a minimum policy which involves allowing cigarette consumption to increase over time along with the consumption of other consumer goods, or a moderate policy that allows cigarette consumption to increase but not as much as the consumption of other goods, or an aggressive policy that ensures a decreasing consumption over time. So which path should the government take according to the experts? Verite says that policies that discourage consumption aren't the way to go about it.
So, of course, government is free to choose whichever policy model they would like. Verite itself has recommended or sort of gone with analysis on the moderate policy, right? So most countries, I think, would say the minimum policy is too minimalistic, and that's not what is followed even in international sort of guidance on cigarette taxation. The aggressive policy is, of course, very aggressive. And Verite has defaulted to suggesting that Sri Lanka look at the moderate policy, or at least done the math for the moderate policy, because then we can think how to go forward from there. And this is what I've already shown you on what the moderate policy looks like. Maintain affordability rather than aggressively discouraging consumption by using the most aggressive method. But of course, it can be adapted. So government can always do a little bit more if it wants to reduce consumption.
The ex-United States Coast Guard cutter USCGC Douglas Munro was formally handed over to the Sri Lankan Navy by the United States last Tuesday. Following the delivery, the ship formally joins the Sri Lankan Navy fleet on the 26th of October under pennant number 627. 115 meters in length, ex-USCGC Douglas Munro is the second Hamilton-class high-endurance cutter received by the Navy. Further, it has been designed for 187 of crew and is equipped with state-of-the-art weapons and machinery. The Sri Lankan Navy is expected to deploy this vessel in wide-ranging operations that include conservation of marine resources in the region and search and rescue of naval and fishing communities in distress. Further, the vessel is scheduled to sail home in 2022. This voyage of the vessel, commencing from the port of Seattle across the Pacific and Indian Oceans to Sri Lanka, will possibly be the longest ever sea voyage a Sri Lankan naval vessel has ever sailed in Sri Lanka's Navy history. Welcome back. The Colombo Stock Share Price Index closed weaker for the first time in 9 sessions, ending 9.05 points lower at 10,137.85 points. Meanwhile, the S&P SL 20 index of more liquid stocks fell 6.14 points to close at 3,692.58. Now here's Dimantha Matthew with today's market update.
Today we saw a lot of volatility in the index similar to yesterday. However, yesterday the market managed to scrape into the green, but if you look at today, the volatility saw the market coming back into the red territory. So we saw an uptick in the market during the first half of the session. However, after midday we saw all the gains being erased and the market coming back into the negative territory. So overall we saw the ASPI declining by 9 points and and S&P SL 20 index declining by around 6 points.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. Have a good night.